So hello and thanks for joining us for today's webinar from the Institute for Research on Poverty at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'm Dave Chancellor and I'll be your host today. So we are going to be looking at what's next in virtual human services. So over the last 15 months, human services providers have had to make big changes when it comes to the sorts of virtual services they offer. So today we're going to talk about what's worked, what hasn't, and how what we learned in 2020 half of 2021 could change the way services are delivered in the future and the sorts of innovations that will help providers adapt to the changing needs of their clients and technologies. So we have a great panel with us today to help us do that. So we're going to be hearing from Annette Waters of the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation, Matt Lyons of the American Public Human Services Association, and Nadeem Siddiqi of the Wayne Metropolitan Community Action Agency. So thanks to all three of you for being here. I also want to acknowledge the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation for their support of this webinar series. That said, any positions expressed in this webinar aren't necessarily those of ASPE or the Institute for Research on Poverty. So with that, Annette, let me invite you to start sharing your slides. And you are a social science analyst in the Division of Data and Technical Analysis at ASPE. And you're also a previous guest on this webinar series, I'd like to note. And so we're just so happy to have you here, and let me turn it over to you now, okay?
Thank you, Dave, so much, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this webinar. At the beginning of 2020, when the pandemic hit, ASPE was tasked to start a new project, Virtual Human Service Delivery under COVID-19, a scan of implementation and lessons learned. There was a team of us that worked on this project. It was Amanda Benton, Jennifer Shantz, myself, Pamela Winston, and Alec Vandenberg. So the project, again, it took place at the very beginning of the pandemic as things were shutting down. And what we did is we did a quick qualitative research project to look at and understand the successes and challenges with virtual services. And we assessed human services, how successful could they be in a virtual platform? How successful could they be in a virtual platform? What we did is we talked to 18 programs across the United States. They are not representative of all human services programs, but this is who we talked to: Head Start, home visiting, child welfare, child support, domestic violence programs, responsible fatherhood programs, workforce, TANF, housing, elder services, Project Launch, and CSBG. We had semi-structured interviews with 56 program administrators and frontline workers and 11 federal and national key informant organizations, including participant focus groups. This analysis only represents one point in time in a very fluid situation. So first of all, we want to deal with who does virtual services work least well for. Most programs found that virtual services did not work well for individuals who didn't have access to technology, right? So if you didn't have access to the internet and devices, it's kind of hard to connect virtually to deliver services. Multiple programs consistently mentioned that virtual services could be challenging for those with limited technology experience or knowledge. If you didn't already know how to work technology, it was a challenge. Individuals with intellectual disabilities was a challenge. Participants who are young children, that's very challenging for them. Individuals who are non or limited English speakers, people who are undocumented, migrant and seasonal farm workers, older adults, individuals in large families with not a lot of space in their households or busy households, and people experiencing crisis. These groups of individuals, it was challenging to deliver services to them. However, we also found out who virtual services work very well for. Many programs reported virtual services work best for families with young children who would otherwise need childcare in order to access services. Those with transportation issues. Though programs noted that some of these people do not have access to technology, those who did have access to technology, transportation issues in terms of accessing, getting to services became non-existent. Those with health concerns, and those who are tech savvy and have easy access to the internet and devices, virtual services work very well for these populations. Opinions varied about some populations' experiences with virtual services. Programs thought that virtual services could work well with those people who had mental health issues such as anxiety, working families, rural populations that do have access to the internet, youth and young adults, and people at risk of and experiencing domestic violence. But opinions varied. It's very much dependent on the person's circumstances. We have a few quotes from the field, and I'll just read one of them. For example, today we had a patient who is 95 years old having memory problems, and he got very frustrated because he couldn't find his insurance cards and kept saying, "I don't know why you're making me do this stuff on the computer. This is not right." So for older adults, it may be a challenge, like as this example here states, to try to deliver services virtually. Now, just a few comments on perceived effectiveness. Easy or more effective. Virtual services introduce more convenience for participants in terms of electronic signatures, not having to go into an office and give a wet signature. It also increased staff productivity and communication, streamlined direct exchanges and group activities. Very effective in those areas. However, virtual services are harder or less effective in terms of building rapport between case managers or social workers and clients, because you lose that human touch, which is very important in terms of building rapport when delivering services. Social emotional learning and interaction for children are problematic in a virtual environment. Some assessments, including safety focused ones in the child welfare space, you really can't really do it virtually. You need to be in the client's house to assess safety issues. Some said there was no impact on, some programs said there was no impact on effectiveness in terms of virtual services, but other programs said it's too soon to tell. Now, again, we were in the field with this study in the summer of 2020. A lot has changed since then. So again, please remember, this is a one point in time assessment of what happened with virtual services. Perceived effects on efficiency. There's wide agreement about some areas of greater efficiency. In terms of staff and participant travel times, staff commuting and travel to offsite meeting, visits with clients, home visiting and child welfare, participant travel for routine and in-person services or workshops and events, travel reimbursements, those kinds of things, much greater efficiency when we do it virtually. Also, electronic or verbal signatures versus requiring clients to come into an office and write a signature. Other efficiencies we saw, you can have larger events at lower cost when you're doing virtual services, such as trainings, for instance. And there's apparently increased staff responsiveness. However, there are concerns about decreased efficiency. Participants may need more time and help to build rapport, again, back to that human touch between clients and social workers or case managers. There are technology issues and gaps faced by both staff and participants. One thing we found in this study is that not everybody has access to the internet, which we knew, but it really became an issue during the pandemic where lots of services moved online. And staff productivity, home distractions, adapting to a new system, and burnout. All of us have experienced like Zoom fatigue where we're just on all the time. And so that gets to be challenging in a virtual environment. Some more quotes from the field. We have a social worker who could do 6 one-hour-long visits a day remotely. But for those same families, she could only do 3 in-person visits in a day because of the drive time. So where there has to be, going and meeting clients back and forth, this administrator could do more visits when it's virtual than if you actually have to get in a car and go and visit, the clients. And another quote from a frontline staff member: "We may be on the phone a lot longer because people are starved for someone to talk to." So this speaks to greater engagement. The pandemic, where people are isolated and in quarantine and trying to reach services, they want to talk. And actually, that's a very good thing, right? Okay. There are mixed perspectives about in-person versus virtual services. Okay. Discussions with a small number of participants on their experience with virtual services largely confirmed what we heard from staff. So we had a small focus group of participants who had done virtual services. And again, not representative of, the larger population of clients who access services. But it did pair very nicely with what we learned when we talked to the administrators and the frontline staff. Some participants felt they could engage more easily and efficiently with certain virtual services. Certain services, however, could lose critical camaraderie and engagement when done virtually. Many participants thought programs should offer both virtual and in-person services in the future, drawing on the strengths of each. So people were talking about a hybrid approach to delivering services. Participants wanted sufficient information on how best to use virtual services, and programs need to understand exactly what their participants require. So virtual doesn't work. There's not a one-size-fits-all way of delivering services. There has to be information gathered from participants about what they need to make virtual services work and how to make sure that the staff have what participants need. Just a few more quotes from the field. "Getting the occasional surprise text from a case manager is like a spark of joy." That was from a workforce development participant. And then someone from a responsible fatherhood program said, "The talk and sharing seem to be more genuine in person. It's different when you're talking to someone when they're sitting right next to you versus," I'll add this piece, "trying to communicate over a computer," right? The last one, "Virtual services, it should be based on each family's need. They should have a choice." So it's not that we're saying, now that we're in this new environment, everybody needs to move to a virtual environment. Not so. The client, the person accessing services, has to stay in the center of our minds of what they need in terms of whether it's appropriate for them to access services virtually. Considerations for measuring virtual services. Programs can incorporate measurement strategies at any point in the virtual service delivery process, even after services have already started, to provide timely information for discussions and decisions about virtual services, which just means in real time, let's see if this is working, if it's meeting the needs of clients. Studies on telehealth and remote home visiting demonstrate the feasibility of collecting data and rapid learning from virtual services assessments. Programs can measure existing and novel outcomes specific to the virtual environment, such as provider-participant relationships and comfort with technology. Again, it's in the moment assessing whether this is working well for the client. Exploratory assessments of virtual service delivery in the short term can provide the basis for planning subsequent rigorous evaluations. To my knowledge, the pandemic it's been here for a year, but in terms of virtual service delivery, we're at the beginning of this. So we need to really know whether it works, how it works, and who really it works best for. So we've got some research to do here. Suggestions for future research. The effectiveness of virtual and hybrid services. We've not really been in this space before on a large scale when talking about delivering delivering human services. So there's an opportunity here for us. We need guidance for programs on selecting and using the best technologies for both clients and staff. We need a lot more information on promising practices in virtual and hybrid service delivery systems, and how to effectively serve populations who have historically faced barriers to service. Participants' perspectives on virtual and hybrid approaches must be taken into consideration when we're doing future research, because again, they're the people, they're the center of all this, and knowing how best to serve them and what to do for them will help us form better programs. So in conclusion, there is no one size fits all. Virtual services have made many strengths to leverage, but they also have substantial limitations. Most sites that we spoke with expect to continue incorporating virtual approaches into their services after the pandemic is over. And a well-considered individualized approach to combining or choosing between virtual and in-person service delivery is likely required for complex services to be accessible, efficient, and effective as possible. We have to give careful thought about the strengths and trade-offs that will be necessary to ensure that programs work best for the people who need them. And thank you for letting me present today. If you have comments or questions, please put your responses in the chat, and I'm going to turn it back over to Dave.
Annette, thank you so much for that. And if you've been paying attention to the chat, Annette's colleague, Alec, has a link in there for additional resources that Annette and her team have worked on, made available. So please do check those out. Matt, if you want to start sharing your slides, I'd like to introduce you here. So Matt Lyons is the Director of Policy and Research with the American Public Human Services Association. And Matt, you've also served in a variety of roles in state and local government, I believe in terms of offering economic support, working in disaster recovery, and offering housing services. So thanks so much for being here, and I'm going to turn it to you now. Thanks.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you, Annette, for that wonderful overview. It's really reaffirming to hear such similar and aligned content in terms of research on this topic, which seems to be the million-dollar question of our network in terms of what's next. How do we draw on lessons learned from the past year to move ahead in virtual human services? So I certainly don't have all the answers, but I hope that we're able to convey a little bit of what we've been hearing through our network of agencies, and hopefully be of value to you all in your work going forward. For those who may not be familiar, quickly, I'll let folks know, so I'm with the American Public Human Services Association. For those that are not familiar with us, we are a bipartisan membership association representing state and local health and human services agencies. We work through both senior level executives that oversee these agencies, as well as their subject matter experts that administer the critical programs that get underneath serving families, supporting child and family well-being, addressing economic mobility, addressing all the social determinants of health that help families to reach their potential. And as you can imagine, during the pandemic, these key services had to rapidly evolve to meet the virtual needs of families and meeting them where they are. As an association here to support those agencies that are charged with meeting that task, we have a lot of different ways in which we provide space to communicate and connect around challenges, opportunities, and best practices for delivering virtual services and all the vast array of issues that agencies faced during the pandemic. We naturally leveraged our various affinity groups, we call them, but the communities of practice that focus around different programmatic areas of health and human services, where we've convened state and local agencies to come together to talk through all their different obstacles and to go deep into implementation details to really understand what's needed to overcome barriers to accessing services. As we've completed and kind of convened these conversations with our agency network, we've also looked to go deeper through partnerships with researchers and other key stakeholders to disseminate findings through more rigorous research as well for the broader community. And I want to talk a little bit about a couple of different reports that we have produced over this past year that particularly have a focus on some of those adaptations that give us some insights on what agencies have done to shift to virtual services in this space, and where the challenges and opportunities lie ahead. So to do that, I want to first talk about a report that we published here in January of this current year. This was a project that we did in partnership with support through the Kellogg Foundation, as well as in partnership with the Administration for Children and Families and their Office of Regional Operations. We had the opportunity to conduct structured interviews with human services executives from the Northeast and Southeast parts of the country to really go deep in understanding within those health and human services funded programs, how did state agencies in particular go about adapting during the pandemic? And we explored that across several themes, including the shift to virtual services, in addition to the broader range of partnerships, waivers, and flexibilities, and more general kind of crisis response planning that agencies had to deploy to kind of weather the storm that was 2020. I'm going to focus primarily on the shift to virtual services, since that's the focus of this conversation. And kind of first talking a little bit at a enterprise level as agencies and how they pivoted at this time. There was major transformation that agencies had to very quickly adapt to and adopt across all of their systems, services, and operations. So when the kind of pandemic quickly set in and there was a rapid shift to virtual and remote service delivery, the first challenge that agencies consistently reported was just the significant investment that was needed to build out an infrastructure to support a remote workforce and a remote clientele. So looking at some of the underlying technology, so creating VPN networks that had sufficient bandwidth for their workforce to be able to connect into confidential systems of record and eligibility systems to complete critical case processing, but also looking at equipment from laptops to cameras to cell phones, all the different tools that are needed to conduct their work. There was significant procurement, IT investments, and related investments that had to happen very quickly that states, frankly, had never experienced before and had to meet the moment. This was certainly also a cultural shift. So the concept of telework very, very differently from agency to agency. And this shift was significant that agencies had to adapt to. It was also significant for the customers that we serve that are very familiar with in-person services and rely on. I think it draws a lot on some of the insights that Annette shared around how there is no one-size-fits-all, and understanding what people are comfortable with in the most equitable way to provide them access to services. There certainly was technology and infrastructure that did work well. So agencies, generally speaking, did have strong online application systems with mobile or document upload systems for applying for benefits, and that was heavily leveraged throughout the pandemic. There was increasing focus around live customer support options. So leveraging call centers and building those out to support the increased bandwidth that was needed, but also creating some automated technology through bots and other tools to help people address their questions and issues through automated functions. And I think very similar to some of the challenges that Annette shared, there are certainly needs for enhancement. So broadband access remained a challenge both for the workforce and for the families that interact with our human services agencies, but also just beyond just an issue of access, there's also the issue of digital literacy that was a challenge in creating human-centered systems that could work effectively for families. And just understanding what worked effectively in a virtual environment versus what didn't. We'll get a little more into that in just a few minutes. I'm talking a little bit about a few kind of specific program areas where some of the shifts occurred that I want to point out. In the child welfare space, there were a number of very rapid shifts that were very key to the evolution of and preservation of critical services for families. So virtual visitations have quickly become a mainstay during the pandemic and are likely to have some type of continued role in the long run. Similarly, this was important for home inspections for protecting people's health and safety. Court hearings was a huge challenge. So many courts faced tremendous backlogs to keep up with court hearings related to foster care and child welfare issues. And the ability to pivot to virtual court hearings was a really critical tool to make sure that families, children, and parents could have their cases heard timely and in a way that is accessible and safe for everybody. We also, I think this was an important moment for folks to understand the importance of technology as a tool, not just for workers, but for the people that are served and interact with these systems. So actions through the Children's Bureau, through ACF, in order to encourage and allow states to purchase cell phones and laptops for families that are separated to be able to maintain communication, creating spaces for youth and birth parents to maintain relationships, as well as supporting older youth as they're moving out and being in place, put in a position to thrive on their own, were all critical investments that were part of this trend of virtual. The other somewhat unique challenge was in the shift to 4E prevention services through the Family First Prevention Services Act. There are a number of very rigorously evaluated practices that are eligible for funding through as preventative services to support families at risk of child welfare entry. These services have not been evaluated for being provided through a Zoom screen, and adapting these and understanding the fidelity of those interventions in such an environment has been a evolution as agencies adapt to reflect the needs of communities and making sure people have the supports they need in a safe and healthy way. We've seen similar types of changes in TANF as a form of assistance in employment and training support. So the shift to virtual employment training, while already there pre-pandemic, rapidly expanded, and both for remote services, but also mobile-friendly ways to interact with employment training supports has been really key. And certainly we've heard a lot of success around opportunities to engage at a time and place that's most convenient for the individual participating rather than having to be in person in a specific place. Similarly, we've seen changes on the application side as well, and TANF and other programs that have in-person components that have been adjusted. I want to also point to a second report that APHSA actually just hot off the press was released last week. In addition to the programs administered through ACF, SNAP has been a program that has seen many shifts throughout the pandemic response. And over the course of this past year, we've done some very in-depth analysis to understand state agencies' reflections on some of those shifts and what's worked, what they're carrying forward in future program administration, and across a number of themes from the kind of application processing to supportive services to engaging clients, a lot of feedback around virtual services. And I'll just touch on a few of the pertinent areas that we explored in this report. First, I want to say, when we look at the technology that agencies use to support application and case management functions for that clients have to engage in to either access or maintain their benefits, what we generally found is that states heavily relied on the tools that they had pre-pandemic. So there was already most states had online applications, fewer states had mobile-friendly applications, and a mixture of states had telephonic resources to apply for or provide updates on to maintain benefit access. While few states were able to add or expand upon these functionalities during the pandemic, it particularly revealed the significant infrastructure costs it takes to roll out some of this new functionality, particularly in a crisis response mode. But to the extent that agencies had these tools already, they were heavily leaned on, and states often reflected on the types of more mobile-friendly and diverse types of ways that clients could interact that would be helpful going forward and that they plan to draw lessons learned for. informing future investments. We also explored with agencies a key waiver flexibility that was available during the pandemic in SNAP. So states are generally required to get audio recordings of applicants that want to apply telephonically for assistance. Many states did not have this infrastructure during the pandemic, and federal flexibility is to allow for capturing a telephonic signature by recording a case note when somebody indicates that they consent to applying for the program, was a really key tool for agencies to maintain that virtual functionality and provide people a remote way to apply for assistance. States consistently found that this was not just helpful on the client end for maintaining access or facilitating enrollment, but also for them in managing their caseloads when there was a large increase of applicants during that first wave of the pandemic. SNAP online purchasing has also been a huge shift in the virtual world. So pre-pandemic, a handful of states were operating with a handful of retailers on providing options for families to use their SNAP benefits through online purchasing. In a matter of a couple of months, that shifted from a handful of states to nearly every single state rolling out an online purchasing program. And over time, there was significant increases in retailers that participated as well. Despite that broad rollout, we consistently did hear that there were challenges and barriers to families actually being able to successfully utilize and scale up their use of online purchasing. In particular, the process it takes to become an approved online purchasing retailer remains a burden, particularly for smaller retailers that need to meet kind of highly detailed technology specifications to meet that requirement. But also on the family end, the cost of delivery and fees for is not an eligible expense in the SNAP program. So that's coming out of your pocket to pay for. And for families that are living on the edge and don't have that budget, that is a real barrier that remains. But this does, there's been rapid growth here, and there's certainly a lot of opportunity to further scale this, not just in SNAP, but we're seeing this now in WIC and other programs as well. In addition to using your SNAP benefits, we also explored some of the SNAP supported services and how those pivoted to virtual environments. One of those is SNAP Education, which is a critical program in SNAP to provide education to families around healthy eating and diets and nutrition. And many states had limited footprints in the online virtual world and engaging families through that education curricula. But we did see a large majority of states rapidly move towards online and virtual engagement on SNAP Education, many moving some of their curriculum to online, some moving all of it completely virtual. As we did that, we heard a lot of positives on the benefits of that, but a lot of challenges with building out that footprint, as well as meeting families that are just not experienced or comfortable in that virtual world. So while there's a lot of promise for continuing that going forward, we did hear that from a majority of states that engagement overall within SNAP Education was lower than pre-pandemic, which again, I think really reinforces the fact that there is no one size fits all. We need multiple paths forward to support families in meeting them where they are. We similarly looked at SNAP Employment and Training, which is the workforce program component of SNAP. We saw a lot of different ways in which agencies tried to support families through virtual or remote employment and training opportunities. This chart here gives you a sense of some of the different tools, from dropping off paper packets to creating pre-recorded courses to telephonic services, text-based programs. Virtual reality has increasingly been a important part of the work, as well as online meetings. And similar to SNAP Education, we found that a lot of successes that we've heard through focus groups, but also the fact that engagement is more challenging when you're in a remote-only world, and that in-person touch point for many families is also very important. So in terms of what's next, I think just to summarize a few themes that I think are emerging in our network. First off, there's a need for more modernization around the application and case management functions within human services. So creating tools that empower families to be in control of their benefits in ways that work for them, self-service portals, mobile-friendly, integrated, linked online applications, all of that. There's continued progress to be done. Similarly, on the education and training side of things, a real interest and need to build out the understanding of what works and for whom, and a need to grow this work, but do so in a way that's thoughtful of making sure that we meet everybody in the way that's best suited for them. And as I mentioned on the child welfare side of the world, where there's more rigorously informed evidence-based practices that we're deploying, more work to understand which services, when adapted to a virtual environment, work well, I think is really key to continuing to understand how we can provide supportive services in a way that is most convenient and accessible. And then a couple things on the SNAP side. The online purchasing represents a space for tremendous growth and investment. EBT technology that's used for purchasing using your benefits, ability to move towards virtual wallets, ways we can get past mailing issues to help get people directly their benefits in ways that are most intuitive and modern to them, I think is also a promising area of growth as well. With that, I'm going to put up my contact info. We're happy to take questions at the end, and thank you for the time.
Okay. Hey, thank you so much, Matt. That's really useful, and I think you showed us a lot of great resources there. Let me welcome Dr. Nadeem Siddiqi, who is the Director of Data Strategy at the Wayne Metropolitan Community Action Agency. So, Dr. Siddiqi, you've had a kind of a unique role in this, in that you've built a lot of the infrastructure that the Wayne Metro Agency has used, but also you do a lot of the tracking to kind of see how well it's working and some of the things like that. So I'm really excited to hear your talk here, and I think you should feel free to go up until about 2:52 your time. I want to make sure you have enough time, and we'll go a couple minutes past the hour just so you can get we can get those questions. Okay, thanks so much.
Will do. Thanks, Dave. Yes, I'm going to build off of what Annette and Mark were talking about. They've been talking about at a higher level. I'm going to be talking about on the ground, what we actually built and what worked and what did not work for us. First of all, let's see if this is working. So as Dave mentioned, I'm with Wayne Metropolitan Community Action Agency, Wayne Metro for short. We're part of the National Community Action Agency Network. Our mission is to eliminate poverty and improve people's lives. We're based out of Southeast Michigan, the greater Detroit area, Wayne County, and hence the name Wayne Metro. We were founded over 50 years ago. At this point, we have over 700 staff members. At the beginning of the pandemic, I'd say January of 2020, we were just 400 staff. And I'll talk about the growth that we have, almost doubled the staff members that we have. We serve approximately 35,000, or we used to serve 35,000. That number has gone up quite a bit. Low and moderate income residents throughout Wayne County and Southeast Michigan. And we have over 75 different programs covering educational, housing, emergency services, a whole wide variety of services to help our clients. So when COVID-19 hit at the beginning of last year, we had to immediately assess where we were. As was mentioned, everything obviously shut down in terms of physical. Oops, why did this move forward? Everything shut down, and we had to quickly move into a virtual atmosphere. So we had to assess what is our internal remote working capabilities. Matt just mentioned, and I'm not sure why this thing keeps moving, because it has paused. All right. We had to look at our systems and our processes that we had in place. This is frustrating. I'm sorry, but when I tested this out, this was not moving. And all right, I'm gonna have to fight with PowerPoint here. It's decided to move slides without me knowing it. Actually, you know what? Hang on, give me a second. I am really sorry. And let me start sharing again. Where did Zoom go? Are you able to see my screen at all? Dave?
Yeah, we can see your screen right now. You've got a form assembly document up, but I wonder if you have timed the slides perhaps in PowerPoint there, that they might be advancing automatically.
Yeah, I am
I'm
going
not a PowerPoint
to,
expert, but that's just a guess there.
all right, I'm just gonna go the old fashioned way here. So you're gonna have to see these things so that they're not moving. All right, this should
It
work.
looks good to me. Thanks so much.
All right, cool. Sorry about that. The timing was actually turned off, but for some reason, I have no clue. I'll have to ask Bill Gates about that. All right, so we had to assess internally what was going on, looked at our systems and processes, how we were delivering our services to clients. We had to look at our contractual obligations, internal and external, with our board, with our committees, with the systems, as well as, yeah, we're moving things online, but what are the services that are immediately needed by the clients in this crisis? I mean, we have 75 different program services. We're not gonna be able to turn everything on immediately. So what did we do? First of all, we had to move everybody 100% remote. We did that. We were in good shape. We had a good Connect Center. Our technology was in pretty good shape. Everybody had laptops by and large, and then the few that did not, we got them the laptops. We worked with our state regulators to obtain exemptions. Matt was mentioning the exemptions, and I believe and then as well mentioned about exemptions. This was really important for us in terms of specific systems that were required, certain processes that were required. We received those exemptions in place. And then we started developing solutions that would be helpful to the clients. So based on our analysis, we found that there are 6 critical areas of assistance that were immediately needed: food and income support, water and energy assistance, rent and mortgage, property tax, emergency plumbing repair, and funeral assistance. That for our clientele, these were the 6 most critical areas of assistance they needed. And so those are the services that we targeted. And what did we do? Well, prior to COVID, we were a paper-based system. Generally, people would come into the office, submit their applications. We would feed them into our various systems. We immediately pivoted to online applications. And we used very simple forms, very simple tools. We created a Google form that was then attached to a series of cascading Google Sheets. So free software, because we were not in the position at that point right away to go and buy software. So we needed to use as many free tools as possible. And this was readily available and immediately available. And it was very quick to develop. Myself and one other person, we worked and we were able to develop the forms that were needed and then the Google Sheets on the back end. With this application, then you could apply for all 6 services within 5 minutes. So clients would be able to come in, fill out the form, on average 5 minutes, and you've applied for 6 different services. So really great from a client perspective. On the back end, we started looking at how we were processing these applications. Initially, we had one team dedicated to processing things that were coming in. We quickly realized the volume was too high, and then the complication of the different systems. We kept playing with our processing system on the back end, having 5 teams, 6 teams, 7 teams, different number of teams. We kept adapting on the back end. And in terms of technology, we kept tinkering with our systems as well in terms of the forms, the way they were structured, the questions, the logic, the Google Sheets on the back end, how they connected with one another, how the data came back to the teams so that we could process them faster. This all was continuous development. We were able to build a very simple dashboard that got us information real time. So this would update in real time. This was great for our leadership. This was great for clients. This was great for the state. This is great for our staff members to be able to see what's happening on the ground. And we get great information that food, utility, and rent were the top requested information. Water and diapers was next. Within the first week, we received over 4,000 applications. This is when you compare to our normal volume of our LIHEAP system, MEEP, the Michigan Energy Assistance Program, which is our LIHEAP program. We used to get 2,000 applications per year, and now we receive 4,000 applications within a week. In 3 months, we received 5 times our average volume. But in all of this, our systems did not break down, our services did not break down, and we were able to effectively get the program services to the clients who needed them. And as we were doing this, as was mentioned by Annette and Matt prior to myself, you start realizing, well, this is not going to work for everyone, right? You're assuming that people are online and able to access all your services. Well, we already had a Connect Center, our call center in place. Well, that Connect Center now became a lot more critical in the sense that people were calling in because they were not able to access our website, or they had technology challenges, or whatever the case might be. And we would walk them through completing the application form. In many cases, we would complete the application form for them with their permission, and then they would mail in the documents that were needed. So that way, even if they could not access the technology, just by through a simple phone call, we could help them access that. We conducted a bunch of educational webinars. Matt mentioned towards the end the digital divide. This includes both hardware as well as access to internet. So we partnered with different agencies to distribute hardware, laptops, tablets to our clientele so that they could actually access the internet. But even with the hardware in place, many people would not have access to the internet itself. And so getting discounted internet services, getting people access to Wi-Fi services, free Wi-Fi services became really important. And then as many as possible, moving our services online. When you talk about income tax preparation, with tax season, it's really great to be able to hear the story of this 80-year-old person who has not used technology before, had a tablet, but was mainly using it to watch YouTube videos, and calls our Connect Center, and we're able to walk through our income tax service program, and we're able to walk him through submitting his income taxes online. And he was so proud of that at the end that, you know what, I'm going to do this online every single year going forward. Food requests, as I mentioned before, were one of our top requests that was coming in. But we also recognize that not everybody could get to the large, massive food delivery locations. So this again caused us to sit back and innovate, say, what can we do? Well, we need to get food to people at their homes. They might be restricted because they're quarantined because of COVID-19. They could be senior citizens who are not able to get out, people who just don't have transportation, a whole series of issues. Whatever the case might be, we need to get the food to them. So we partnered with a company, Atlas, locally in Detroit, to create an online food marketplace. And you see some pictures on the screen there where it's just like Amazon or any other marketplace. You go in and you get a certain amount of credit that you've been pre-approved for. So if you got $30 of credit or $50 of credit, well, instead of getting a food box that is generic that everybody on the street gets, and you may end up with stuff that you have allergies to or you don't need or whatever the case might be, now you can go online and say, well, I don't want any beef, I want chicken, and I want vegetables, and I want fruit, and I need cleaning supplies, and I need toiletries, and you put them into your cart, and you can check out at the end, and that box, customized box, would be delivered to you in your house. So this is an online food marketplace that we work through, and we're hoping to continue with this. So this, again, just a point about diversifying our services, innovating, looking at what clients were actually requiring on the ground, and coming up with solutions that would meet with that. And as we're doing all of this, we're collecting a ton of data, right? You're collecting all of these numbers. So what are you doing with all of that information? Well, that data guided us to who needed what type of service and where they needed it, down to the zip code, down to the street, so that we could deliver the services to them. We took that data and then we shared it with policymakers, with funders, with administrators, so they could understand the challenges that we're facing on the ground. This resulted in a lot better understanding from all parties concerned. And then you start getting new resources becoming available to help address challenges that we have. As we're doing this, we're continuing to grow. We talked about technology. We started off with version 1, our Google Forms and Google Sheets. Well, pretty soon we found that Google Forms, nice as they are, they have some limitations. You have to have a Gmail account to be able to upload documents. Well, not everybody had Gmail. I'm using Yahoo, I'm using Hotmail, or whatever else the system might be. Well, so we moved to a form-specific software called Form Assembly on the front end, still connected to Google Sheets on the back end. But then you start realizing, well, Google Sheets has limits. It has 5 million cells, which for most users, you're like, oh, I'm never going to hit 5 million cells. Well, we started hitting 5 million cells on a regular basis, and our sheets would keep crashing. Well, we need something else. So, well, we need to build a little bit more. And so we started building a database in software called Caspio, which is a low-code database because we're not programmers, so we can't be programming, but point and click a little bit here and there. We learned a few things, and boom, we got a database set up. So now we're at that point where we are at version 3. We're building where the forms are in form assembly. The data comes into CASPE on the database on the back end. This is still not good enough because we want to now improve this even better. You know, the perspective that we have, we want things to be better, faster, easier for clients, as well as for staff to be able to process. And we want to be able to use all of this information to make sure that we're actually hitting the outcomes that we want to do. It's not like we're doing things for the sake of doing. We want to make sure we're actually hitting the outcomes and making people's lives better. And so we are now building out our version 4, which is integrating CASPE forms and database into all-in-one solution. We're doing that, and hopefully there'll be a version 5 and version 6 to come. But that growth mindset has continued to drive us to help the clients even more. So this mindset is what I want to get to, is really important, that every time we were hit with challenges, we thought of them as opportunities. You know, how can you develop new systems? This universal app, going from 6 services to now 8, 9, 10, whatever number of services all in one, makes it easier for clients to complete their application forms in a few minutes instead of having to give the same information multiple times. How do you change your processing on the back end and then keep retraining the staff and rotating the staff and cross-training them to be able to do all of this, right? That's something on the back end that we've had to deal with, and the staff have been amazing. They've been reacting very positively to learning new tools, to learning new processes, and changing and adapting. Doing all of this was not, I mean, I mentioned at the beginning that we're now at 700 staff members. We started at 400, right? So that's been a huge learning curve for us, growth curve. Our budget has increased 4 times. We were not able to get services to our clients as quickly as they needed it. And this was a dire situation. Well, let's partner with other agencies, let's sub-grants. And so we partnered with 14, 15 different other organizations to expedite food delivery, for rented mortgages, to get the laptops out, for Wi-Fi services. So we have Wi-Fi antennas going up on different buildings so that the whole neighborhood now has free Wi-Fi service available, and so on and so forth. How can you partner with other agencies, knowing the challenges that you're seeing on the ground, to make people's lives better? So for us, yes, this was a challenging period, but we see this as a dawn of a new era. This is the sun rising on a new day. We see this as very positive. We're not going to be going back. There's going to be a hybrid solution coming forward. Definitely people need in-person services. We've been doing that, but a lot of online services that have worked really well has allowed us to serve a lot more people a lot faster, a lot better, and we'll continue to leverage all of this. With that, I'm more than open to questions. My information is up there. I'll actually put in the chat box our website if people are interested in checking out the program services, the actual application forms, and my contact information as well. And I'll put it out there if anybody's interested in how we actually built all of this out. If you want to reach out to me, I'm more than happy to walk you through a lot of our solutions and technology, et cetera.
Nadeem, thank you so much. If you've been watching the chat box, you can see just over and over again people saying amazing. This is amazing what you and the team at Wayne Metro have been able to do. So thank you so much for sharing that. I do want to invite Matt and Annette to start up their webcams too, and we're going to jump right into Q&A and try to get to as many questions as we can here. But one quick question, Nadeem, we had a question about how many people live roughly in the area that Wayne Metro Community Action services. Do you have a rough idea of that?
I do not. I would say
it's a big number.
2 to 3 million is
my
guess, but I am not 100% sure.
Okay. Sorry to put you on the spot with that one. So
actually, let me Google that while we move to the next
come back to us on that one. So, but we do have a question about sort of geographical differences that have occurred in sort of these things. So so there's a lot of areas like differences in technology access, just sort of different things. So a lot of I think what we're seeing is that different places are dealing with very different challenges in that. And so Annette, do you want to start us off with what your team at ASPE has kind of learned about that?
I actually want to go back to, it was a question in the chat about, I think it was San Francisco, and how people lost their benefits because there was no internet access because the libraries closed. In our study, what we found is some of the programs pivoted quick, and one program actually outfitted a school bus with Wi-Fi, parked it in a parking lot, and then young people came around that school bus to access school. So as Nadeem just said, people got really creative in terms of how to still get things done during the pandemic. All of the learnings have not been discovered yet, but it was really impressive what we were able to do very quickly. Like human ingenuity worked. And as Nadeem said, there was such a surge of need. Programs, for the most part, tried their best to meet those needs.
Matt, did you have anything on you? Go ahead, you're ready.
Yeah, I would just add, I mean, the question is really valid. I mean, the impacts are so different. I mean, just even from a agency operation standpoint, you take the state of New York. Like, if you have New York City, which is a incredibly dense urban area where their call centers are housed in skyscrapers that there's no social distancing capabilities available at all, and there's no infrastructure for that like massive source of assistance in the state to address the need. Like, that was an area that had really critical need for rapid change, flexibility in adjusting rules to reflect new models of service delivery so that they could maintain access, whereas other areas of the state were not nearly as affected. Rural to urban areas, huge differences. I mean, a lot of the issues are not new in rural communities, and I mean, it's incredible some of the ways that agencies have kind of band-aided together solutions to meet the need there, but in a lot of ways, this has exacerbated some of those challenges. So definitely, there's not one size that fits all solution for people. When it comes to kind of virtual solutions on the agency side, I think the same goes from that perspective too.
Okay, I want to jump to the next question. Nadeem, towards the end of your talk, you talked about looking forward, you're going to be doing some sort of a hybrid model here, right? And, you know, sometimes hybrid approaches are harder. Is that, you know, I don't know if that's true in your case, but I do want to ask about the considerations that you at Wayne Metro have been doing to kind of looking towards a hybrid approach. And then Annette and Matt, I'd love to hear your thoughts about that as well.
Sure. Hybrid, when I'm thinking of a hybrid, I'm thinking of from a client perspective, that the clients can access our services, whether virtually or in person, right? But from a systems perspective, it'll be a single system. So if you end up having two different systems, then that'll be complicated. How are you doing this in person versus elsewhere? But, you know, people can come into our offices, clients can come into our offices and ask for services. We'll help them complete the same application form that they would have filled out on a laptop at home. So they're going to end up in the same systems, go through the same processes. On the back end, for our client, for our staff, it's going to be a smooth, streamlined process. But from a client's perspective, they now have the option. You want to walk into the office, talk to somebody face-to-face, give your documents to them physically, and then somebody else takes a photo of those documents and uploads it for you, versus you want to sit at home and do it all by yourself. So you've got this hybrid approach happening. And then there are obviously some programs that you cannot do virtually. We've been doing in person. Now you got to come up with slightly different ways of collecting that information.
Okay. Matt, do you want to jump in there?
Sure. I mean, 100% agree with everything that Nadeem said. I would just say at like the macro level, we need to be asking ourselves this question in the context of cutting across funding streams, programs, systems. How do we align this hybrid system so that we're not creating redundant and duplicative processes that people are having to navigate? And there's, just as in the pandemic response, where we saw some fragmentation in how certain programs and funding streams changed their rules that differed, that created some administrative burden for families. As we think about lessons learned, we need to also have that conversation at the systems level. So I think that's really key to unlocking, making sure that someone like Nadeem can do what he needs to do to be nimble in the direct local service delivery.
Okay, and Annette?
I've given a version of this presentation over the last year, and what I want to say about hybrid systems, and I've said this over the last year, we have the opportunity to build something we've never done before. The pandemic forced us to pivot, like Nadeem's program is a great example, to pivot overnight and to create some incredible systems that on one hand, we maybe should have been doing a lot of this stuff earlier. But we can't, like, I think, Matt, you were talking about telework. Oh, we can't do telework, blah, blah, blah. Everybody's been teleworking, and it's been, we've been getting work done. So in terms of building a hybrid system, I think I want to talk about a brand new, like the Bionic Man, a stronger, faster, service delivery system that incorporates everything we've been talking about, but that keeps the client's needs central. And it's not to say, to the exclusion of what staff need, right? Because they work together. When we're talking about good service delivery, we need to make sure these systems, that clients can access them, but also that programs can offer what they need, clients need. So I just think it's been a rough year for everybody. It's been really rough. However, we have an opportunity to build something that we've never built before. So there are opportunities in a pandemic. That's what I've been saying over the last year. There are opportunities to do just some great things and to push past some barriers. And I hope we do it.
Okay. We're kind of out of time already, but I want to give each of you an opportunity to kind of give a sort of a parting thought, like what are we looking to next here? But before I do that, I just want to plug, we do have another webinar 2 weeks from today. We're going to be talking about the expanded child tax credit, both some of the promise that offers in terms of reducing poverty, but also some of the pitfalls that we're maybe seeing, the challenges that it might take to get that money into low-income families' bank accounts. So please do join us for that. We're going to shoot out the registration email for that on Monday. But wrap up thoughts. Annette, you started us off today. Would you start us off here? And what do you think? What should we be looking forward to?
I think we should be looking forward to some just innovative programs like what Nadeem has just put out. Just absolutely fantastic work, Nadeem, that Wayne Metro has done. And so I'm excited to hear about these types of programs. Again, I want to see some research in this area, like what works best, does it work best for? And I'm just excited about the future.
Okay, Matt, do you want to go next here?
Sure. I'll just say, the pandemic has certainly brought to light some of these challenges and hopefully has shown some of the solutions, but these are not new issues. I think we need to understand that these are all rooted in structural barriers and inequities that are baked within the systems that have been in place for a long time, and we need to keep focused on those root cause solutions as we think about kind of drawing lessons learned. I think if we keep our eye there, we can really make some amazing progress in the coming years to kind of transform how the health and human services systems works for families.
Okay, and Nadeem, I want you to get the final word here. So what do you got for us?
Well, I think mindsets is really important. We should have a growth positive mindset. Think of all the positive opportunities. I think this is an exciting time period for us to innovate and grow to allow us to serve our clients better, faster, easier. We've just proven to ourselves over the last year that we can do it. So we can just continue growing on this.
Okay. So I just want to thank all three of you and all the people that joined us today so much for just taking the time to be here. I think this is, it's really exciting to see some of the positives that have come out of this thing that we've been through. So thanks so much for your time, and we'll send out the recording probably tomorrow, maybe Friday, and some other resources as well that you can look to. So Nadeem, Matt, and Annette, thank you all so much. I really appreciate your time. And have a great day, okay?